The diplomatic chamber aboard the HMS Modest Regret smelled faintly of recycled citrus and tension. Not the good kind of tension, like the one before a first kiss or a particularly well-timed sarcastic jab, but the tightrope between interstellar, annihilation kind. Lieutenant Commander Elliot Vance tugged at the high collar of his uniform, which had been starched stiff enough to pass as an emergency blade. Across from him stood Queen Zerha of the Chorus Dominion, 7 feet of poised alien royalty, cloaked in shimmering obsidian silk, and flanked by twin drones that hovered like judgmental librarians. Her ears, long, arched, and regal, twitched once as she assessed him, and he had the absurd thought that she could probably hear his heartbeat from 10 meters away. "You represent all of humanity?" she asked, her voice smooth as charged glass, her violet eyes unblinking. Vance resisted the urge to scratch his eyebrow with the barrel of his sidearm. "Not all, just the parts that showed up sober to the vote." The chorus delegation didn't laugh. Neither did anyone else. Zara tilted her head, an alien gesture that looked disturbingly like disappointment. Somewhere to Vance's left, Ambassador Kroll was mouthing "stick to the script." But Vance had never been fond of scripts, or ambassadors, or situations where a mispronounced syllable could trigger a gravitic implosion. "We offered ceasefire. We offered economic alignment. We even offered full access to our Netflix archives," Vance continued. "What else do you want? My hand in marriage?" Silence bloomed like a tactical fungus. A low whir from the translation sphere echoed, repeating his words in quori, followed by a tone that sounded suspiciously like a spit take. Queen Zera's eyes narrowed slightly, and the edge of her lips curved. Not into a smile, not exactly. More like the beginning of a cosmic riddle. She stepped forward, one slow, calculated movement at a time, until she stood so close Vance could see the swirling fractals inside her irises. "I accept," she said. Vance blinked. "Accept what now?" "Your proposal. It is bold, unorthodox, potentially suicidal, but amusing." Her long fingers made a ceremonial gesture, either the universal sign for betrothal or a quori insult involving fish. The drones began to emit what sounded suspiciously like wedding music composed by a malfunctioning AI. "Wait, was that a proposal?" he asked, his voice cracking like a poorly tuned space violin. The Queen laughed, a sound like silver bells being dropped into a black hole. It bounced off the chamber walls, short-circuited one of the ceiling lights, and caused Kroll to faint gracefully into a potted plant. Zara stepped back, still grinning. "We are now betrothed, Commander Vance. May our union end this war." Vance felt the room tilt. "You've got to be... Listen, that wasn't... I was being sarcastic." "Yes," she replied. "That is why it worked." He looked around, but the expressions on the human and quori delegates alike had unified into a single collective emotion. Cosmic horror wrapped in awe, dipped in mild confusion. And so, the war ended. Sort of. A treaty was drafted. Sort of. And somewhere, deep in Vance's stomach, a voice whispered, "Congratulations, you idiot. You've just married a warlord queen with ears longer than your diplomatic career." Elliot Vance awoke on something far too soft to be legal in most gravity zones. The bed beneath him felt like it was made of cloud-stitched dark matter, cradling every regret he'd ever had. Somewhere overhead, artificial dawn cycled through a soothing gradient of nebula-inspired hues, while soft music played, a melody suspiciously similar to "Here Comes the Bride," if composed by an alien DJ with a fondness for electro sitar. He sat up too fast and regretted it immediately. His new quarters were massive, more like a ballroom pretending to be a bedroom. The walls shimmered with stardust-embedded panels, and plants that looked suspiciously sentient tracked his movements from crystal vases. A floating orb hovered at his side, blinking expectantly. "Greetings, royal consort," it said, its voice sounding like a fusion of Morgan Freeman and static. "Would you like your morning nutrient slurry in bold banana nebula, or oceanic plasma surprise?" "I'd like to wake up from this fever dream," Vance muttered, swinging his legs over the bed. Selection not recognized. The events of the previous day crashed into him like a runaway hover truck. The ceasefire conference, the ill-timed sarcasm, the alien queen's laughter, and the diplomatic seal now branded into his personnel file under the category of binding galactic matrimonial pact, accidental. Before he could ask the orb for a sedative, the doors whisked open with a soft hydraulic sigh, and in floated a being that looked like an upside-down squid wrapped in a designer silk. It spoke in 7 harmonic tones. The translator orb chirped, "I am Zelthar, your matrimonial liaison and primary aesthetic consultant." Vance blinked. "For what?" "The wedding, of course," Zelthar sang. "The sacred union between Her Magnificence Zerha and you, her newly acquired man. I'm not even sure she likes me." "Perfect. Chorus marriages thrive on tension." Moments later, he found himself dressed in ceremonial armor made entirely of biofiber that pulsed with faint bioluminescence, and made it look like he was being gently electrocuted by fashion. He was escorted through a palace corridor that shimmered like a gas giant's rings, passing by portraits of previous Chorus monarchs, all of whom looked like they could kill a man with a glare, and probably had. At the end of the hall, Zerha waited. She was sipping a glowing drink with one hand, the other stroking her chin thoughtfully as she stared at a digital projection of 2 wedding cake designs, both shaped like dying stars. "You look acceptable," she said. "You know this is insane, right?" Vance replied. "Galactic peace often is." She waved a hand and the projection dissolved. "You're Terran. You improvise. Improvise this wedding. Charm my people. Pretend you care. And in return, no more war." "Pretend?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She leaned in slightly, her long ears angled forward like antennae tuned to a frequency of trouble. "Unless you don't have to." They stood like that for a moment, him in humming wedding armor, her glowing softly like royalty dipped in starlight. Somewhere between them was a joke they hadn't made yet, and behind them, across 100 systems, fleets once poised to destroy each other were now standing down, scratching their heads and Googling how to politely crash an alien wedding. The first assassination attempt occurred during a guided tour of the Chorus Nebula Gardens, a biodome suspended in orbit, containing flora so intelligent they were technically eligible to vote. Commander Vance was admiring a translucent orchid that seemed to be judging his posture when the vine next to it lashed out and aimed for his throat. He ducked instinctively, though in truth he mostly tripped over his own boot. This resulted in a spectacular fall that sent him rolling downhill and directly into Queen Zera, knocking them both into a pool of sentient koi, who immediately began voicing legal objections. After the guards neutralized the rogue plant, by apologizing profusely and offering it a job in security, Zerha emerged from the koi pool, sputtering stardust and laughter. "That's 2 lives you've saved now, Commander," she said, brushing koi scales from her ceremonial braid. "One more and tradition demands I bestow you with an asteroid." "I'll settle for a bathrobe," he replied, wiping algae off his ear. "Preferably one that doesn't whisper interdimensional secrets at me." Zerha's grin tilted. "You're adapting." "I'm evolving through sheer panic, Your Majesty." They dried off in a chamber of self-warming winds and anti-shame nanobots. Vance, still mildly damp and entirely exhausted, found himself seated next to Zera on a floating terrace, watching 2 moons rise over a gas giant the color of bruised wine. He glanced sideways at her. She wasn't just alien, she was impossibly, irritatingly composed. Her long ears twitched once, as though picking up an emotional frequency he hadn't meant to broadcast. "Didn't think I'd make it this far," he admitted, swirling a glass of something that tasted like optimism and fermented grapefruit. "Figured I'd die horribly, or be vaporized, or vaporized horribly." "You still might," she said sweetly, then added, "but not today." He laughed, genuine, short. She turned to him fully now, examining him not as a soldier or a diplomat, but as a man. One who somehow managed to fall into a war and then fall harder into its solution. "You find this funny?" she asked. "I find me funny," he said. "You I find mildly terrifying." She took that as a compliment. Later that night, he was led through the Royal Archives, a floating chamber of memory crystals suspended in zero-grav. The crystals whispered fragments of ancient Chorus history, wars, revolutions, love poems, and one suspiciously detailed guide on how to manipulate Terran democracy through pastry exports. One particular crystal flickered and sang Zerha's coronation speech. He watched her younger self, still tall, still elegant, but fire in her eyes instead of frost. She spoke of unity, of power without cruelty, of bending stars into safe harbors. She ended the speech with a vow. I will not marry for advantage, but for the kind of chaos that burns warships down to songs. Chaos. Vance touched the crystal. Maybe that's all he'd ever been. As he floated there, the chamber door opened behind him. Zerha entered, barefoot, casual, still more intimidating than a fleet of dreadnoughts. You're curious, she said. You're complicated, he replied. Good, she murmured. Simple men are for simple empires. And somehow, despite everything, the coy, the whispers, the politics, he realized he didn't want to leave. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The shuttle descended over Earth with all the subtlety of a diplomatic comet. Doves scattered, clouds parted. Several elderly pedestrians on the eastern seaboard clutched their chests, not from fear, but sheer overexposure to drama. As Queen Zerha's ship settled onto the landing platform outside Geneva's United Nations dome, it emitted a harmonic tone so resonant that 5 nearby buildings experienced spontaneous feng shui. Inside the dome, Elliot Vance adjusted his collar for the 100th time. His Earth uniform had been updated by Chorus Royal tailors, which meant it now shimmered in 10 colors and had sleeves that subtly rearranged their embroidery based on his blood pressure. He hated it. I look like a disco diplomat, he muttered. Beside him, Zera stepped forward, unbothered. Her ceremonial dress floated around her like liquid starlight, and her long ears were crowned in silver filigree woven from mined stardust. She paused before the waiting delegation, hands clasped behind her back, the image of regal amusement. This is your world, she said. We've cleaned it up since you last threatened to vaporize it, Vance offered, managing half a grin. The welcoming committee included politicians, cultural icons, an awkward string quartet, and one emotionally overwhelmed poodle in a tutu, who had somehow slipped security and attached itself to Zera's leg in tearful reverence. She stared down at it for a full beat. Is this an emissary? No, Vance said deadpan. It's a dog. Does it have combat capabilities? Only if you're made of sausage. The Earthside gala was absurd. Lights blinked out of sync with music. A human ambassador tried to bow, tripped on the hem of his robe, and somehow reprogrammed the dessert drones to fire mousse instead of plating it. Zerha, watching the chocolate mayhem unfold, leaned toward Vance. Your people are deeply strange. Thank you, he replied proudly. As the evening unfolded under the dome's shifting auroras, Vance found himself fielding well-wishers, scholars, and one highly insistent conspiracy theorist who believed the marriage was a cover-up for Project Mooncow. Zera handled each interaction with practiced grace, though once, just once, Vance caught her watching a child try to mimic her posture, long paper ears taped to her head, eyes full of awe. For a moment, the Queen's expression softened into something unmistakably human. Later, as they slipped away to a private terrace overlooking the city, Vance offered her a drink. It fizzed briefly, turned blue, and emitted a tiny scream before settling. I don't know what that is, he said, sipping it anyway, but I think it called me Mother. Zerha chuckled, the sound low and smooth. Earth is unexpected. That's our brand. She looked out over the skyline, her ears twitching slightly as she processed the chaos, the noise, the smell of toasted sugar and hydrogen-fueled hover cars. They don't fear me. You're marrying one of us, he said, setting the glass down. That makes you family. Family, she repeated slowly, as if testing the weight of it. They stood like that for a long moment, Queen and Commander, alien and Terran, watching a world that had, against all odds, decided love might be easier than war. At least until someone spilled mousse again. The galaxy has a knack for irony, especially when it involves stolen artifacts, rebellious nobles, and one Terran commander who can barely keep his shoes tied. Elliot Vance found himself crouching behind a pile of what looked like ionized space debris, his glowing ceremonial armor doing an excellent job of making him the worst candidate for stealth. Beside him, Queen Zerha adjusted her cloak with an elegance that made dodging plasma bolts seem almost graceful, her long ears twitching like finely tuned antennas scanning for trouble. The target was the Unity Crystal, a relic older than most star systems and vital to the upcoming wedding ceremony. Legend claimed it could bind two souls across dimensions, or more practically, activate the peace treaty between Earth and Chorus. Unfortunately, a faction of rogue nobles and Earth purists viewed the marriage as an abomination, and their plan was simple: snatch the crystal and plunge the galaxy back into chaos. "Did you plan this?" Vance whispered, narrowly avoiding a blast that turned a nearby rock into a glittering cloud of antimatter. Zara's lips curled in a smirk. "Plan? Number improvise. Always." They darted through asteroid clubs pulsating with alien beats, past booths selling zero-gravity street food that smelled suspiciously like burnt ambition, and into the twisting corridors of a hollowed-out wormhole station where gravity played by its own whimsical rules. Vance stumbled twice, once narrowly escaping being squashed by a dance contest gone wrong. "Your idea of a getaway route is unconventional," he muttered, dodging a projectile that zipped past like a jealous comet. "Conventional routes are boring and easily trapped," Zara replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. The pair reached the vault housing the Unity Crystal, a chamber shimmering with quantum locks and ancient runes. As Zara manipulated the controls with delicate precision, Vance kept watch, his mind racing faster than the blinking security drones overhead. Suddenly, the rogue nobles burst in. Their leader, a scarred exiled prince with a vendetta and a taste for dramatic entrances, brandishing a weapon that hummed with lethal energy. "Hand over the crystal, or the Terran gets vaporized," the prince sneered. Vance, thinking quickly, grabbed the nearest object, a plasma fork left from an earlier diplomatic dinner. It was useless as a weapon, but perfect for flailing wildly. "I suggest you reconsider," Vance said, waving the glowing utensil like a very confused conductor. Zara's eyes glowed violet as she unleashed a pulse of psionic energy that sent the prince sprawling. Vance took advantage of the distraction, lunging for the crystal and cradling it like a newborn star. They fled the vault as alarms blared, weaving through corridors and blasting past stunned guards. Outside, their ship awaited, engines humming like a contented beast. Breathless and bruised, they collapsed in the observation deck, the Unity Crystal glowing softly between them. "You're surprisingly handy with a fork," Zahra teased. "I'm full of surprises," Vance replied, grinning. In that moment, amid stolen relics and near disasters, something shifted. Trust. Maybe even something resembling affection. Because if they could survive this mess together, maybe they could survive anything. And somewhere deep in the stars, the galaxy waited to see what would come next. The sun of Chorus blazed like a molten core, its golden pulses rhythmically syncing with the hum of the orbiting, ceremonial platform where the galaxy's most unexpected wedding was about to unfold. Commander Elliot Vance stood near the edge, the biofiber armor replaced by a tailored suit that still shimmered faintly, as if unwilling to let go of its otherworldly origins. His long ears weren't alien, but Zara's were, a regal frame that caught every stray photon, twitching occasionally with nervous excitement. The assembled dignitaries glowed in their multidimensional finery, emissaries from systems that had never agreed on anything, now united by the absurdity of a Terran and a Chorus queen tying their fates together. Somewhere, a drone attempted to play "Here Comes the Bride," but got stuck in an 8-bit loop, prompting a few chuckles. Zerha approached, radiant and composed, her eyes sparkling violet with a hint of mischief. She whispered, "Ready to make a fool of yourself?" Vance smiled, feeling the weight of the past months, the assassination attempts, the accidental courtship, the stolen crystal, and the precarious peace they'd brokered. "I've tripped over worse things in front of entire fleets." The efficient and ancient AI hologram with a voice like warm nebula gas began the ceremony. Vows were exchanged in a blend of Quori and Terran dialects, phrases that wove promises of unity, trust, and the occasional veiled threat to vaporize traitors. Vance found himself comparing Zara's grace to a neutron star's beauty, radiant, intense, and impossible to ignore. When it came time to say "I do," he stumbled over the words, his voice cracking as if the weight of two species rested on a single syllable. "I do," he said finally. Zara's response was a teasing promise. "I vow only to vaporize those who truly deserve it." Laughter rippled through the crowd, an audible release of months of tension and uncertainty. As they sealed their bond with a kiss, awkward and sincere, Vance caught a glimpse of himself reflected in the crystal platform beneath their feet. The sarcastic soldier who'd once joked about marriage to end a war was gone. In his place stood a man forged by chaos and courage, ready to navigate the infinite complexities of alliance, love, and cosmic diplomacy. Later, beneath the twin moons of Chorus, the newlyweds watched stars drift past like silent witnesses. Zara leaned her head on his shoulder, her ears brushing gently against his neck. "You were right," she murmured. "Sarcasm can change the galaxy." Vance grinned. Who knew? Somewhere in the vastness of space, fleets that had once prepared for annihilation now celebrated. Peace, fragile but real, had been born, not from treaties or weapons, but from a moment of unexpected humor, a queen's laughter, and a human's reckless heart. The galaxy exhaled, and in that breath a new story began.